Let's look at creating a Windows Form app to convert inches to centimeters. And since it's a Windows Form app, I'm going to select Windows Form app here. So the only thing I've done so far is went to New and Project, and I'm going to do Windows Form app. So I went to New and then Project, which opened up this window. I'm going to select Windows Form app, and I'm going to come down here and name it. I'm going to put my initials in this. It's just the centimeters, and it's GUI. And you always want to make a note here where you're going to be saving this project, and I don't really like this particular location. So I'm going to browse for, let's see, all my documents. There's Visual Studio 2015. It's easier if this is in alphabetical order. So 2017 and projects. There you go. When we start turning in projects, these Windows Form projects need to be zipped up. So you're going to need to know where you're saving these at, because I need everything. So click OK, and go on and save my previous work. As you can see, I've been. So here we have a blank form, and if you look at some of these files over here, the one called program, this is the code for it, and basically what it does, it runs the new form, or it loads the new form. And if you click under Form 1, you can usually finally get it to show you something. So this is the Form Designer code, and typically you don't have to do anything to this. Here's the design, and to see the code associated with this, we need to click on, we need to put something in. I'll show you how you get that here in a moment. Let's spend a moment looking at just this form. In this bottom right hand corner, there's a window here, and if you're not seeing properties in this lower right hand corner, you need to make an adjustment, play around with view, and get this open. This is showing me the properties of Form 1, and feel free, as a matter of fact, I recommend that you change the names on these things. So here's the name, Form 1, and I'm going to change this to Converter, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to put Form in, starting with a lowercase letter, in the front. You'll see later this is a good habit to get into. Like, for example, I'm going to add a button here in a few moments, and I'm going to start its name out as BTN. It just makes it easy to find things of a certain type if you have a uniform naming convention for the type of object it is. So I'm going to call this Form Converter, and the text, this text here is, I'm going to put here inches to centimeters, and when I press enter, you'll notice that's what shows up here. Okay? Now, if I haven't mentioned it already, what I want this particular Windows Form app to do is convert inches to centimeters. I think I did mention that. Now, before you start on a GUI, Windows Form project, I think it's a good idea to sketch out at least your best estimation of what the interface is going to look like. And this is what I mean. I just sketched this out. This is my form, of course, and I know that I'm going to need a text box for the input, the number of inches being input, and I'm going to need a button to trigger the conversion process, and I'm going to need a place to output my result, and I'm going to need probably a label here just to tell the user, this is the box where you put in the number of inches. So, and you're not necessarily going to get this right the first time, but I think it's important to have a sketch and write in the names of things. For example, this is going to be a box, a text box. And my first thought was I'm going to name this inches box. That's all one word. And then I remembered that I'm probably better off to leave txt bx in front in case I add some more text boxes. Then I can find, all the text boxes will be in the same place in a list. And I'll show you what kind of list I'm talking about here in a moment. It makes it easy to find things. Same thing with the labels. I'm going to leave the LBL in front of this, and it's going to be LBL input inches. Down here, LBL converted. I could have said converted to centimeters. So there's a couple points I want you to see here. I think it is a good idea to leave the type of tool here, leave that indication in front, and then use very descriptive terms. We could call this text box 1, but if we add some more text boxes, it's going to get hard to remember what text box 1 does. So take a little time. Name things using descriptive words. So here's my basic plan, and I'll refer back to this in a moment. Let's see, this is the one I'm working on. So recalling my picture there, I'm going to need a text box. So over here under Common Controls, I'm going to click on the text box and drag it into my form, and I'm going to release and reposition it because I didn't like where it went. Now notice this is highlighted, and go down here to your properties. Notice here now I'm looking at the properties of text box 1. And if you're trying to find something, and I've noticed I've managed to turn off labels and they're not displayed, so you can always find them over here. So here's one of these lists that I was telling you about, that it's good to have everything in. Leave the leading text as it is, so you can easily find components of certain type. So this is currently text box 1, and there's a text property here, and I could probably put the label in there, enter inches here, but I want to have a separate label. You can play around with that. I want to go up here to its name, and here I'm going to leave the text box there, and I'm going to call it text box inches. I think on my picture I had txt bx, whatever you want to do, just so you can find this easily. So there's a whole lot of other properties here that you can play around with. I'm not going to get too far into this, at least initially. Watch what happens here if I double click on this. It opens up form1.cs. And yes, I could rename all this and probably should. We'll worry about that some other time. But what happened here, let me see if I can resize this a little bit. There you go. What has happened here when I double clicked this text box, I'm brought over into the, in this case, the Form 1 CS code, and notice where it put me. Private void text box inches. You should recognize that the name of the text box. Text changed, and then there's some specific arguments there. Now, in our case, we're not going to do anything to the text box inches itself in this particular example, which is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I just want to show you what happened there. Let's go back to the design, and I'm going to need a button. And notice when I pull the button over there, I get a little help lining it up. So I'll put my button there, and if I want a bigger button, I can see I can make that the same size as that. I'd really rather have a larger text box here, but y'all can play around with that. So here's button 1, and notice since it's highlighted, button 1 properties are being shown over here in the properties section. And for the text here, I'm going to put the word convert. Now, the text is what's displayed in the button and in the form. I want to go up here now and change its name. Notice it defaulted to button 1. And I'm going to call this button convert. And, thinking about it on my little sketch, I called this BTN convert. That works just as well. It just makes it easier, to find all the buttons if you leave the button on there. So I'm going to do that. Now, I'm going to double click on the button, and notice I'm back over here in Form 1 in the CS file. I'm in a different method. Private void button convert click. So if somebody clicks on the convert button, the code between these two curly braces is going to run. Now, in our case, this is where all the good stuff happens. So I'm going to enter some things here, and I'm going to start off with a constant, and I want this to be a double. And since it is a constant, I'm going to capitalize it. Centimeters, if I can spell it right. In inch. And I'm going to go on and initialize this as 2.54. That's a good approximation. And of course we need a semicolon. I'll take off the caps lock before I forget. So what I've done there is I've declared a constant number, basically the number of centimeters in an inch. Now I can use that in calculations. I'm going to need some other constants. I want a double called inches. That's going to accept the input from that text box. Double centimeters. That's going to contain the output, contain the calculated or the converted number of inches into centimeters. And I like to leave a blank line between variables and actual code. And here I'm going to type inches equals. So this is an assignment statement. Whatever I type here is going to be evaluated and stored here in this double that I've declared called inches. Now remember, the text box is actually a string, and we have to convert it to something. So I'm going to use the convert to double method here, and there are other ones you can use. Try parse, we'll look at that later. But the thing to remember is text box is a string. If you're going to do any new kind of numeric calculations on it, you're going to have to convert it into some numeric type value before you can do any calculations on it. So the input here is coming from, and I need to make sure I get this right. So if I spell this properly, text box, IntelliSense is going to take over, and notice there's the name of the component, text box inches. I can press enter there, and IntelliSense will complete that for me. And I want the text from that text box. Close parentheses, semicolon. Now again, what happens here? We're going to enter a number into this text box inches. However, we are interpreting it as a number, but really to Visual C++, it is a string. So the convert to double takes this input string and converts it into a numeric double, and then assigns that to the double variable, the variable of type double called inches that we declared right up here. So that's what's going on with this line. This is strictly input, and you'll find the more you program, the input and output consumes a lot of your time and effort in writing programs. So we've got the number of inches, and we've got it converted into a numeric value stored in a numeric variable. The next line, we can actually do a calculation now. Centimeters equals, again, now centimeters is a variable of type double, so we're going to do something here and store that in this variable, or the location that's been set aside for this variable. So what we're going to do here is multiply the number of inches that we just got through converting and storing. We're going to multiply that times the constant centimeters in an inch. Now notice that IntelliSense followed along here and it's going to help us out. So you press enter and it fills that in. For people who are kind of questionable typers like me, that is a major feature. Okay, take caps lock off. So what have we done so far? Well, we've input a string, converted it into a double, stored that in inches, and then we took that number of inches multiplied by our constant, 2.54, stored that result in centimeters. Now, we're going to switch back here because I didn't complete my design. I need some place to put the output. And remember my sketch, I had a label here. It's going to be an output label, and I'm calling this label converted. So let's get ourselves a label, drag it over, that'd be a good place there, and it will size according to font size and what you're trying to output, etc. Now while we're here, let's go look at its properties. currently the text says label 1. That doesn't really make much sense. I'm going to play around here. What if we put in output here? Again, that's just the text. That's what's going to show up in there. Let's go adjust its name. Now, recall I think I called this label convert. How about label converted? So now I can reference it. So if I go back to Form 1 CS here, and I'm going to put another line in, just a blank line. You know, blank lines don't cost anything, and I think it helps your readability. So here we have label converted. So we'll click on that or press enter. Dot txt. Oops, text. So this is going to. This is a component, a tool. This is the text property of that. We're going to assign something to the text of this label. Now, a while ago we put in output here. We're going to overwrite that. So press enter. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to construct an output string. And it's going to be a combination of the values stored in variables and string literals, and I'm going to concatenate them together. So it's going to look like this. Inches, remember that's a variable, and the plus sign is the symbol for concatenation. So this inches here is actually the number of inches, and I could have, probably should have, back up here, this double called it number of inches input or something like that, a more descriptive name, because this is already getting a little confusing, isn't it? And I'll show you what I'm talking about. Inches plus, or concatenated with, and I need a literal here. So quotation marks, put in a space so these values don't run together, and I'm going to put in inches is, another space, quotation marks. So this inches is a variable with a number stored in it that user input. This is a string literal. So I probably should have called this inches something more descriptive than just inches. So live and learn. Sometimes I get in a hurry. Another concatenation. Centimeters, and you can make the same argument here. I should have called it something more descriptive, and I really need to spell that properly. And you'll notice while it was spelled improperly, I had some errors down here. So if you watch down here in the error list, you can usually catch things earlier on. So this centimeters here is going to be whatever was stored in centimeters after the conversion. So we probably should have called this converted centimeters or something like that, so that we could distinguish it from the string literal that I'm going to put in right now. Space centimeters, space quotation marks. Let's see, I think we can put in a semicolon. So let's check this. When this runs, it's going to take the value of inches that was input, display it, follow it with this string literal, follow that with the value of centimeters that the inches was converted into, and then follow that with this string literal. Okay, so, and the good news is at this point I have no errors down here. So let's save this and run it. So I click start, and it seems like it always, the first time you run a particular project, it takes forever. And this is actually a really powerful computer I'm running this on. But it still takes a long time. You can kind of follow the progress up here. And no, I don't know what it's doing. So this is our form being run. This is like it would be if we actually were finished with the app. Now, notice there's no prompt here to tell the user what to put in the box. So we'll fix that. And notice I also have, I put this here to show you where that label was. So let's see if it works. I'm going to input 10 inches, click convert, and notice here it says 10 inches is 25.4 centimeters. So what happened here when it ran, it took this string that was in the text box inches, converted it into a double, and then it multiplied, it stored that in the variable inches, then it multiplied that value by our constant number of centimeters in an inch, which is 2.54, and displayed it. So this was what was stored in inches. This is that string literal. This is what was stored in centimeters, and this is another string literal. And as I pointed out, this would have been much more readable if I'd have called this something besides inches and this something besides centimeters. So think about that. So I'm happy with this so far. I'm going to click close here. This takes me back into Visual Studio. And I'm going to come back over to the CS Design. I need a label up here, and you could put it to the side, you know, depending on your design. I'm going to put it right there. So for label 1 here, the text, this is actually like a prompt. For the user. So I'm going to go with the number of inches below. Now, if you want to, kind of even that out, that looks good. And we need to give it a name. Now, you got to be careful here because I clicked on something and it switched the component over here. So you don't want to change the wrong thing. We could leave that as label 1, of course. Probably not a good idea, though, is it? How about label, I forgot what I called it on my other sheet of paper. Let's just call it label prompt. How about this? Label, oops. About label inches prompt. I like that. That's descriptive. Press enter. So let's see. You might want to think about moving this over a little bit. Make it, how about that? As I told you a while ago, I put in output here. I don't have to have anything there. Now, watch. It went away, didn't it? I lost it. Can't see it anymore. And if you click around here, it's, I don't know if you ever would find it. Here's what you can do. You can go over here in your properties box. Up at the top, there's a drop down. And remember, this was a label and it was converted. So you can click on it there, the properties show up here, and it shows you where it is on your form. So if you lose something, go check over here, And this is one of the situations where if you leave that first word there that describes the type of the component, it's going to be a lot easier to find. So let's see, let's run it one more time. So here's the actual form. There's our nice prompt. And we could change the font, we can change the color, change the size. Let's try something like 16 this time. Convert. 16 inches is 40.64 centimeters. That looks really good. So I'm happy with it as far as I wanted to go. So I'm going to kill that, go back to the project. So there to review here, use descriptive names for your components, and in some cases you're going to need to refer to these. So in our program here, we didn't have to refer to this, but we did have to refer to this, and this is where the code went that actually did what we set out to do. And this output label here, again, label converted, is there, so we had to reference that. So using descriptive labels, names, is going to really help you. And as I was working on this, I realized I'd have been better off, I think, if I'd have called this variable here, for example, inches to be converted. And I wonder if you could rename this and rename all the instances of it. It's going to do them all. So we changed all those at once. And you can pick out a more applicable name for your centimeters. But I think that improves the readability here, particularly on your output. Notice now we've got inches to be converted plus the string literal. Now, Visual Studio does indicate that's a literal by putting it in red. But anyway, I think this is a much more descriptive name for the variable than just inches. So that's the other thing I want you to take from this. Well, actually there's one more thing. Sketch it out first. Now, it's going to change probably as you go along. I actually renamed some of these things, but if I had this actually on a piece of paper beside me, I would just scratch this name out and put in what I really called it. And that'll help you keep up with references to these components as you write your code. So those are all things I wanted you to see. And in general, with these Windows apps, for example, I put on a text box here and I clicked on it, but there's nothing in this method. So the text box, this text box inches, there's no code associated with it. We reference it when we get an input. Typically your actual calculations are going to be triggered by some sort of button. So you'll notice here, this is where all the real program runs, is when you click the convert button. So if you're converting this, for example, from something that you'd written previously in as a console app, for example, you'd want to consider, could I just copy and paste a whole block into this method that runs when the button's clicked? And you may have to do some cleaning up on it, but that's the idea. So think about these things that I pointed out. Start with a picture. Use descriptive names for not only components in your form, but also the variables. And most of your code is probably going to be associated with some sort of button. In this case, that's where the conversion happened. So think about all these things as you work on more and more complicated Windows forms. There are a lot of these concepts are going to be used over and over and over.